was just speaking and letting us know he's okay, and we're excited to have you all here. VIA CEO Jeff Arndt, VIA trustee Kristi Villanueva, excuse me, and myself, William Long. So what we've been doing, as you all know, is this is the third and final session for the transit and mobility track within the SA Startup Week. And I'm excited to have you all as panelists because I've been working with you all for over a decade now, and we need your expertise to hit this home as to what the plan is and why it's important to folks. So I'm going to kick it to Jeff to give us a recap of what the Keep SA Moving plan is.
Certainly, and before I do that, in fact, while I'm sharing my screen, that's probably the best thing because usually it seems like it takes a little bit of time for that to happen. I want to thank SA Startup for having this track as part of their program, and I want to say, as much as you appreciate these panelists, I appreciate the panelists because I believe that we succeed best when we surround ourselves with smarter people. And that's exactly what we've done with this panel for me. So thank you. I'll just take a minute and I'll go through this fairly quickly. This is the presentation on the Keep SA Moving plan. And that is a plan, and I have to get rid of all our faces so I can see the plan, to improve transit mobility network that will contribute to the economy and address population growth. And what I would just summarize that to say is that we want to provide opportunity to all people in our region, to economic opportunity, and we want to be a contributor in our region to handling mobility as we move forward with high population growth. One thing that VIA does today, has always done, is connect people to jobs. And I think there are a number of myths, I should say, regarding VIA. Almost 3/4 of people on the bus are riding the bus to and from work. Most of them to full-time jobs, most of them working 5 to 7 days a week, most of them without having a vehicle in their family, and so they rely upon transit to get them to and from their job. Many of them working essential jobs. We have seen that through the pandemic. Many of our riders work also though in the service industry, so they've been hit by the pandemic as well. But overall, we are that connection to opportunity, whether that opportunity for 3/4 of our passengers is the opportunity to work a job, but also the opportunity to find a job or to go to training or to get an education or to get to medical services or get to the grocery store for food, all essential things. And as I said before, one of the things we really want to be able to address in Keep SA Moving is keeping SA moving, despite the fact, or in light of the fact perhaps, that we have about 1 million more people headed our way over the next 20 years. So I typically say that just imagine if the entire population of the city of Austin laid itself down in San Antonio. And they're going to bring their cars with them, doubtlessly, but they're not going to bring any freeway roads or freeway lanes or roads. They're just going to bring their cars and their people, and we're going to need to accommodate them. So in order to do that, and I know that Representative Lopez in particular will be speaking to this, I would expect, because I've heard you speak eloquently to this in the past, Representative, is that all the modes of transportation have to be firing at 110% in order to accommodate that kind of growth. And so it will be important that transit be able to contribute its share. Now, what makes transit attractive? I've heard one of the other myths is, oh, only poor people ride transit. And that is not the case. There are plenty of examples. And so let's just go east for 3 hours to Houston, where their robust commuter network and their system of HOV lanes, which we are currently just introducing in San Antonio, have created a market that attract people who live in the Kingwood and the Woodlands and Sugarland and Katy. And by analogy, that would be Stone Oak and the Dominion. Attracts large numbers of people, so large that they're operating buses every 5 minutes pre-COVID. So obviously, if you provide the right product, the right service, you can attract people. And what makes service attractive to people? Well, this line graph kind of tells that whole story. So this is a local survey. It's not, and it's a local survey conducted in 2018. So it's not old news, it's new news, and it's local news. Although I will tell you, it's pretty much substantiated across the country. And that is that the interest in riding transit decreases significantly as the frequency of that service decreases. So in this survey, about 85% of people said they would be interested in riding a bus route that operated at least every 10 minutes. But you can see by the time you get down to 30 minutes, you're at only 5%. You've written off 95% of the market based upon that frequency, as opposed to initially only 15% of the market. And one of the dilemmas is that about a 60% of our service, unfortunately, operates in that lower range. And so in order to provide a service that is more attractive and is more convenient and could provide service for people who have other options even, we have to be pushing that frequency curve up. And what else does that mean? Well, the lack of frequency, especially in a network that relies upon transfers, also means that you have a smaller range of motion, if you will. And so these are two maps that look at two census tracts, one on the near east side on the left, one in the medical center on the right. And what we said is if you had 45 minutes to commute, how far could you get by automobile from that census tract, and how far could you get by transit? And you can see the blue in both cases is far greater than the lavender, which is your transit. The blue is your automobile. And in fact, if you're on the east side and you have 45 minutes to commute, you only have access to 10% of the total employment, total jobs within our region, which means that effectively you are being denied access to 90% of the jobs in the region. Or you can choose to travel 2 hours or 3 hours each way, which then denies you access to your family and being able to make use of the time that many of us value the most, right? The second is, well, what if you lived in an area that had a lot of employment right there? You live in the medical center, our #1 employment center. Well, if you live in the middle of the medical center, guess what? You have access to 20% of total appointments. So now you're only, and I'll put only in quote marks, only denied access, if you will, to 80% of the jobs. I mean, that's a substantial problem for people who don't have cars and need economic opportunity. And that's driven largely by the infrequency within our network. And so our plan, which was built starting back in about 2015 when we built Vision 2040, was based upon broad public input. And the public said to us, what do we want in your future plan? And guess what the first thing they said? Frequency. I always say frequency, frequency, frequency. That's the most important thing. They also want more direct service, so more crosstown type services. They want a network that's easy to use and a network that's convenient to use. But at the top, and the defining factor of whether people would find a service attractive and usable is frequency. And so there are 3 things to remember about the Keep SA Moving plan. It's a plan that is designed to provide frequent, fast, and flexible service. Frequent, fast, and flexible. So when I talk about the components, think in terms to your own self there about, so what does that mean about frequency, about fast, and about flexible? So the first leg of the Keep SA Moving plan is improving the current system, which is primarily fixed route bus. It runs on a fixed route on a fixed schedule like what we're all used to. And in this case, those improvements are primarily, guess what? Frequency. Of course, you would expect it to be frequency, but also expanding the span of service. We have people that work in the service industry, get off work at 11 o'clock at night and don't have service available to them. So it makes it difficult. You talk to people in the restaurant industry, they'll tell you that they often have to work their shifts around the bus schedules that their employees use. The second part is expanding mobility options. So in those areas which are either not unserved, and they tend to be more suburban areas, or those that are served by routes that operate only once an hour. And if you think back to that other map, you've written off 99% of people at that point. We replace it with what we call mobility on demand. And I'll talk a bit about more about that because we're currently running one mobility on demand area in town. And then finally, investing in capital and technology with a focus on rapid transits. So you can expand that lavender zone that, that results in 90% of opportunities about outside of reach by speeding up the trip. And rapid transit is a way to do that. HOV lanes are also a way to do that. And as I said earlier, we just started operating in partnership with TxDOT. VIA operates the HOV lanes in the network, and HOV lanes say, we are going to reward you by having just one other person ride with you by allowing you to bypass traffic in a dedicated lane. Rapid transit would do the same thing on local streets or arterials, local arterials. So let's talk about what the results of the plan would be. Frequency, frequency, frequency. So see those circles over there in 2017, almost a quarter of our service was running once an hour, and 40% once every half hour. Well, the research says that if you have another option, you won't even consider transit if it's greater than once every 20 minutes. And so that takes you to the green and the blue. Notice in 2027, only 2% of our service was at 10 to 12 minute frequency, which is what we call the sweet spot, where people don't worry about having a schedule. They just go out and wait for the bus. Under the Keep SA Moving plan, we get the red out, just like Visine, right? I call it Viazine. We get the red out. So there'll no longer be hourly service within our network during either the peak periods, AM and PM, or during the middle of the day when they're running as well. And at the same time, we're expanding that sweet spot service from 2% to 15%. So we're completely changing the frequency profile of the network. And then with respect, especially to mobility on demand, because I said that we could implement that in areas where fixed route service doesn't work, quite frankly. We will increase the amount of our service area that's covered by 30%. And by the way, with mobility on demand, we'll also cut the cost per trip by 30%. So it's a double win. What's important about that 30% is that there are people, well, of course, it's important for anyone that's in that area, but especially for people who have mobility impairment or disabilities that currently don't have access to ViaTrans service, for example. The mobility on demand service is fully accessible, and those people for the first time will have direct access to transit services. The faster connection, another way to look at faster connection, is what percentage of people will now have access to fast connection service every 15 minutes. So we take that 20-minute worst case and we'll move it to 15. And you can see across the board that it's between 30 and 45% of the people increase in the number of people that have access to that kind of service. Mobility on demand, I said I'd talk about that a bit earlier. We are currently running a network, a 17 square mile network on the northeast side of town. And it's much as though you had a network-based Uber or Lyft service that is operated that we call Via Link. So you book your trip either on a smartphone or on a computer on a telephone call. You book a trip, a van is dispatched. You will get information about when it should arrive, what the license number is, what the driver's name is, and what time you'll be picked up and what time you'll be dropped off. And at the completion of the trip, and you may share that trip with one or two other people, but at the completion of that trip, you'll be able to rate your driver, or rate the trip, frankly, but it's usually the driver people rate. I'll just let you know that our average rating on a scale of 1 to 5, the average rating is a 4.7 to 4.8. So it's pretty high customer satisfaction. As a result of expanding mobility on demand around the region, you can see the areas in blue there that are the initial thoughts for where that would go. We'd end up with about 12 to 15 zones as opposed to one, expanding service by 30%, expanding MOD by 300 square miles. 84% of people then would be within a half a mile transit service, 92% of jobs. We also introduced mobility hubs. Those are the STARS, the Medical Center, Port SA, and Brooks. And those are areas where we would work on first and last mile connections. So we get you to the transit center. Let's say we get you to Brooks Transit Center. To get to your place of employment, it's another mile away. And so we would have some kind of service that would connect you. In all likelihood, it would be maybe something like Via Link. I think over time, it could be an autonomous vehicle, frankly, that would get you down there so the vehicle could come back and pick up other people, even though there's no one riding in that vehicle. So a lot of opportunities there for technology. So the plan offers faster trips. It offers better coverage. You can see that. Shorter travel times for both of those purposes, more weekend and overnight service. and evening service, some of which would be operated not necessarily with a traditional bus, but perhaps with a van or a mobility on demand type approach. Then our investment in technology, as I said before, primarily focused on advanced rapid transit, dedicated lane, typically in the middle of a street, fewer stops, 7 to 10 minute frequency. So you're clearly in the sweet spot, works with the traffic signals to minimize delay. Because it's its own lane, it's far more reliable. It's not subject to what happens in the adjacent lanes. We will be moving forward with planning on 4 corridors, north, south, and east and west. I love that. But the north-south corridor runs from the airport to Southtown initially, and the east-west is along West Commerce, and then on to Houston, out to AT&T Center. So that's where we're focusing the initial advanced rapid transit planning. And I've talked about all that. So let me move straight to the funding circumstances and the ballot question. All right. So this is going to be a little school on sales tax. In the state of Texas, 8 1/4 sales tax is the maximum an area can levy, and the state takes the first 6 1/4 cents. So it's effectively they allow the local entities a 2-cent piece of local option sales tax. In San Antonio, the city of San Antonio takes half of that, so they get the 1%, and the other 1% is divided up the way you see in this penny over to the side. And so VIA gets a 1/2 of that other 1%. The advanced transportation gets 1/4 of that other 1% that's divided into 3 pots. So VIA does get a piece of that. Pre-K for SA currently takes 1/8 cent, and that is on the ballot to continue that 1/8 cent. And then there's the final 1/8 cent that currently is dedicated to aquifer protection and linear creekways. Alternative funding is being identified, has been identified, and for those purposes. And so that 1/8 cent sales tax is all that really becomes available for our region. Now, what makes us different from the other large cities in Texas, I should probably keep on the penny, is that if you saw other large regions, other large cities, which are Dallas, Houston, and Austin, that penny that you see on the right-hand side that is all divided up, in those cities, it's not divided at all. That full 1 penny goes to their transit system. So their profile is 1 cent for transit, 1 cent for the city, 6 1/4 cent for the state. But we do not have that circumstance. We voted in 1/2 cent. And so if we just look at the dollars that brings in to support public transportation, we bring in about $190 million a year. And you can see that goes up to as high as $758 million a year in Houston, which has the full penny and a higher level of economic opportunity. So they're bringing in over 3 times what we bring in. And then if you take a look at, well, so what if I normalize it on the size of the service area? Because that really drives expenses. That's the lower right-hand side where you can see that we're at 153. Houston has a similar size service area. They're at 590, but Dallas and Austin, their service area is about half of ours. And so they have a much larger number. Now, also in this chart, you see these yellow crosshatches. That's because San Antonio and Austin both have transit initiatives on the ballot on November 3rd. The San Antonio one I'll talk about shortly, and you can see how much money that raises above the 188. It's about, I'll just say it's about 40 million. Capital Metro is where, and the city of Austin have combined. They have a proposed property tax increase, a 25% property tax increase that would be fully dedicated to their public transportation plan. So you can see that will more than double their funding if that one is voted through. So if we look at our 1/8 of 1 cent, it is, as I show, on November 3rd, the election, and that will decide whether VIA will receive that or not. And there's also, as I said, pre-K for essays on the ballot, and there's a third initiative. It's a workforce development program for the city of San Antonio, and that is laid out that it would begin when in the summer of next year, and it would carry through to the end of calendar year 2025. And so if that is a separate vote, all 3 of those, pre-K, workforce, and VIA, separate votes. It's a separate vote. If it's successful, then The city, for their workforce development program, would start collecting that 1/8 cent sales tax through the end of 25, and then VIA would start collecting it in 2026 and would continue to collect that from that point forward, just the same as the current VIA sales tax is from the point that it was authorized forward. The ATD sales tax from the point it was authorized forward. This likewise would be a fund that would continue to serve us. And one of the main reasons for that is because it pays for operating costs. And so those operating costs recur year after year after year, not capital cost where you can complete the project. And when the project's complete, you don't need to continue to collecting the tax. In our case, we use it to pay for service on the street. And so that's why the ATD and the VIA sales tax, the legislature has conceived them both as permanent sales tax, much like the state's 6.25% and the city's 1% are. This is the ballot language for those of you that have not yet voted. It says it's Proposition A, Advanced Transportation District. I emphasize that because people always think of VIA. The Advanced Transportation District was created by VIA as an entity. And what it says essentially is that the current 1/4 cent, because currently recall there's a 1/4 cent that goes to the ATD, would be increased by 1/8 of 1 cent. And that's what at the bottom there where you see for or against. This reallocation, however, just to make it clear, does not increase the state sales tax. It's making use of that 1/8 cent that is made available. And so there would be from the public's perspective, no change in sales tax. It's a redirection of that sales tax. Just FYI, the ballot initiatives, the pre-K, workforce, Advanced Transportation District, SAISD, they have 2 bond initiatives. They're at the bottom of the ballot. And so you work your way through the ballot and you'll come to the bottom. However, I'll just say that because there were a lot of stories about the ballot's going to be huge, people are going to have ballot fatigue, they won't make it to the end of the ballot. I did vote early and I was amazed how quickly I got to those initiatives. In fact, when I got there, I thought, wow, that was much faster than I expected. So if you want to express your opinion on any of those initiatives, including the Advanced Transportation District, you do have to work to the end of the ballot, but it won't be all that much work. And that concludes my overview of Keep SA Moving. And William, I am going to unshare my screen, I hope. Yep.
Well, thank you so much, Jeff, and really appreciate the intricacies and nuances being explained. Nothing else, just voting down ballot. It didn't take too long to get to the bottom, but I did early vote, and they are there. And for those of you that aren't familiar with the language, it's legalese, and it's not too hard to understand if you just think of it this way, that improving transit funding will help us have a better network in the future. As far as our panelists go, I'd love to have some insights from you all. I know Kristi, as far as the West San Antonio Chamber of Commerce president, I would love to have your insights and your thoughts on VIA's plan, as well as State Representative Ray Lopez. Please feel free to just jump in.
Sure. Well, I know Representative Ray Lopez has a wealth of information with his experience that he has, but I can tell you, just to kind of make it a little more holistically from the business community perspective, whether it's a small, medium, or large size business, we have to remember that public transit serves everyone. So persons with disabilities that are continuing to stay mobile, our veterans that have disabilities and those that don't utilize VIA Transit. And they use VIA in multiple functions. And Jeff did allude to the VIA Link, but there's also VIA Trans, which is a curb to curb service. And then we also have the VIA Van Pool, which you'll see larger groups in manufacturing, in construction, in military. They will normally use that because it's pennies on the dollar compared to using your own vehicle. And if you're going with your neighbors, it's so easy to just go on time together. You're going, you're leaving together. But this is what is our responsibility as voters, as constituents. And that's really why I support people voting yes for public transportation for the funding, is because, first of all, it is way overdue. We have waited 40 years for this to go on the ballot. And the thing is our legislature made it possible for public transit to be funded. And then we as area leaders, you know, kind of bypassed that and said, well, let's cut this penny a little bit more, and public transit will get some, but they're not getting all. So I think that was, you know, we can't do anything about that from those past years. But today, as citizens, as constituents, we can take action. I know that, as Jeff mentioned, a lot of folks think, oh, well, the poor people ride the bus and this and that. And that's really not so. I have a son who is a young adult. I also have a high schooler. Both of them have ridden the bus, my high schooler more than anything. I ride the bus to work. I have taken a pledge that for my environment, while I do need my vehicle for many things, I will at least ride the bus 2 to 3 times a week in a 7-day period. If I can do it more often, I will. As I talk to my staff and other staff members in local businesses, many of them want to ride the bus. They don't want to have the issue of spending the money on a vehicle and the maintenance. They want to be able to jump on the bus and relax. And probably something that we never mention, but I love so much because I am such a strong supporter of public safety, is the fact that VIA has their own police department, and they make so many efforts to keep each and every bus safe and all the transit stations. No one's bothering you. You can come in and out and feel comfortable that as a young mother or as a family, or if your child is riding the bus, they're going to be safe coming and going. So I can tell you, William, it's just been a pleasure to serve on the VIA board. And this is probably the most aggressive board that I've seen in many years of watching. And it's aggressive in the sense of we're doing more for our neighbors of San Antonio and the surrounding areas. Because you have to remember, service goes even further out, even though it's a 1-hour service, it's a little bit longer, but we're going all the way out to Sandy Oaks, to some of those rural communities, Somerset. I mean, it's amazing how many people VIA keeps mobilized.
Thank you. And if I may, before we get some insights from the representative, you jogged my memory on a few things. Over the past 2 weeks, I've spent about 14. I've been to 14 transit centers trying to push the Keep SA Moving plan and help get the information out there to the public. And one thing that happened every single time, the first person I interacted with was the officer on duty, or the security officer. And they're very inquisitive. They would watch me set up my station, my table, and they would come talk to me, introduce themselves. And I never once had one problem. I've had 14 sessions over the last 2 weeks and no problems at all. It's been a wonderful experience. Hot at times, but just being out there with the people and getting those insights has been great. So I definitely can concur with everything you just said. So State Representative Ray Lopez, we'd love to have some insights from you on your infinite knowledge on transit.
Well, I appreciate you saying infinite knowledge. I think there's a lot of folks on this call that have a lot, as much knowledge as I do, and maybe even more. I think what it really becomes is that we all have a different perspective on what transit is all about. And I know we've talked a lot about, a few decades ago, there was a penny and we used it, we didn't use it. And if you look at what was happening 40 years ago in transit in San Antonio, what we are looking at today is completely different. If you stop and think about it from a very sober perspective, if we look 40 years out, what transit will look like 40 years out, you can also recognize that it's going to be a lot different. And if we don't prepare for it now, we will be in dire straits come 40 years from now, when those million plus people have moved into San Antonio. Jeff said it earlier. I've used the adage that they all show up and we appreciate them. However, they don't bring their roads. They certainly bring their cars. They bring their hope streams and the like, but they don't bring their roads. That stays behind. And we're going to be in a real pickle. We can talk all day about all the nuances that were in Jeff's presentation, and all of them are very, very right on. It's a great presentation, Jeff. But I tried, and I've been hitting as many HOAs in the course of the last couple of weeks. I had a little bit of a dilemma there where I kind of had to stand down for a short while, but I'm certainly back at it, and I've had the opportunity to go out and visit a handful of HOAs the last couple of weeks, and I tried to condense it down to something that made sense, and then be willing to have a dialogue and answer questions that people may have if they had issues. And it really became an issue of letting people accept the fact, or maybe get their opinion whether this statement was correct. And do you think that this is an essential vote for essential services? If you do, the vote is simple. If you don't, then we need to discuss the reasons why you don't think this is an essential, a vote for an essential service, and then drill down on what's happening. I know that for a fact last week, I was in a meeting and some folks weren't necessarily negative, but came up with a couple of questions. Said, well, first of all, I got to get from my house to the bus stop, and that creates a bigger problem. Well, if you look deep in, or if you look into any layer, and not even deep into the proposal, that gets addressed. Some people said, hey, listen, VIA is an old, antiquated bus system. And the answer is, yes, it is. But if you look at where it is today and the vision going forward, it isn't a bus system. It's a transportation system. It's a transit system that is doing its best to keep up. Again, we've talked several times about, whether we get the half a penny or the eighth of a penny and why we did. We recognize that as a community that we were, behind the curve for quite some time in transit. I know when I had the honor of serving District 6 for the 8 years on City Council, we had several discussions around how we might be able to direct more revenues to VIA to try to bring it up to speed and deliver the level of services that people are demanding. Jeff, I know that you and I sat on a committee with Ray Saldana and a handful of others, hoping we might be able to identify. I think at that time we were talking about $10 million, trying to redirect those to VIA. The response then, which was probably 3 or 4 years ago, was kind of the same response we were looking at 15, 20 years ago, and said, it's a great investment, but there are other urgent issues, and let's put that one off for just a little while, and a little while, and a little while. And ultimately what we're finding now is that we've put it off long enough. The time now is to step up and make a commitment, make a permanent, long-standing commitment to transit. And VIA being the organization that it's proven itself to be, which does an awful lot of good with very little revenue. They've proven that over the course of the last few decades. The time now is to commit those dollars. This is definitely a great opportunity. I'm really hopeful that folks that had questions have had them answered. And I really have to commend Jeff and your board and the entire team at VIA for doing the outreach and delivering information, because I really do believe that as people recognize the components of the deal as it is on the ballot, they will find out that this truly is an essential vote for essential services. And I think at the end of the day, that will be the driver that'll put us over the top. And then, of course, continuing to improve it over the course of the next few decades. I say it with a smile. I certainly hope I can be here to make sure that it runs safely and well. But I do know that there are generations that are coming behind me that recognize that San Antonio has to have a different view of how we move from one place to another, how we get from how do we do our live, work, and play transit. And I know that they're gonna demand efficiency, and I know Jeff and his team is up to the task. So with that, thank you very much. I'm certainly gonna hang around and answer any questions that may or maybe contribute to responses, because I think that's a lot more effective thing is to have an open two-way dialogue or multiple way dialogue. So thanks a lot for putting this together.
Thank you, Representative, and thanks for mentioning questions. For those of you watching, if you have any questions, please submit them. It looks like we have 2 questions so far. Maybe that we can, it looks like they're about the same, so I'll read them both very quickly. How have you shared this message with the people who don't have access to the internet? And does VIA ever go out into transit centers to talk to real riders? So Jeff, why don't we have you start with that?
Well, everybody who's watching, you see our secret weapon right there on the screen. William has been to transit center after transit center after transit center, handing out to people in the transit centers as they go along. The other initiative that I'll just mention, well, and we've had these kinds of meetings with community groups, et cetera. But the other thing we did was have a series of telephone town hall meetings over the past several months. We've probably done maybe 10. And those telephone town hall meetings don't require you have internet access. You can, in fact, I believe the majority of people who participate are calling in, right? They typically run about an hour. Interesting, everyone is a slightly different topic. But here's the really amazing thing. I believe the last one we had over 3,500 people who called in or watched. I mean, that's a significant outreach, and I've been totally impressed. It's kind of interesting how the circumstances of the day have revealed to us these new tools that may be in fact something that we'll want to continue using even after we're able to meet in person, right? We certainly want to continue to have those meetings. William, I wanted to say a couple things about things that Kristi said. I just wanted to pick up on those thoughts. So the first thing is, the thing about only the poor ride transit. And I said, absolutely not. Look down the freeway. We can find plenty of examples. I can tell you that an underfunded system will primarily attract the poor because you can't put the service out there that would attract people who have other options. And that's kind of what you see when you see 60% of our service is kind of outside of those boundaries. So yeah, if you continue to underfund transit, then you'll continue to get the same result, right? But the other thing I'd remind people who say, well, I don't ride the bus. So I'll remind them of 2 things. Number one is you don't ride the bus, but the guy who served you dinner in your restaurant yesterday, he rode the bus. Or the person that was at the front desk when you went to see the doctor, he rode the bus, right? The people who clean hotel rooms, and tourism will come back, and it's an important part of our economy. They ride the buses. So that's the first thing, is that you may not personally ride the bus, but your lifestyle, your everything about San Antonio relies upon people who ride the bus, right? And in much the way that I don't have any 4-year-olds, or I don't have any school-age children, right? But I still am happy to support the school district because I realize that's an investment in the community. The community needs to have schools. Whether I personally have somebody who goes to school or not is not important. It's the investment in the community. And that's what transit investment is as well. And then the last thing, once I get on a roll, I'm sorry, but the other thing that transit does with respect to providing opportunity, so I encourage you to go to the keepsamoving.com website. I believe that you can see the video there, but we have a series of videos of people that ride transit. And probably from my perspective, one of the most impactful was a young lady, Miss Garcia, who attended the Young Women's Leadership Academy last year. She graduated number 2 in her class. She's currently at MIT with a double major, right? The only way she was able to attend that school was via, and she'll tell you that. And so we went and interviewed her, and to know that, that opportunity for her and for this community as she returns from MIT, the only way for that to have happened was to have that connection with VIA. And so we all benefit from people who were able to do that. And then on top of that, we found out that something like 35% of the young ladies who attend the Leadership Academy used VIA daily to get to the service. So it is opening the doors of opportunity for our future. So anyhow, those are the things I just have to share that. Oh, and I also want to reinforce, Kristi, I call you guys my board, but the VIA board that we have today is extraordinary. And I've been in transit now for over 41 years. So I've seen a lot of boards, and this board is extraordinary. And if we did not have this extraordinary board, we would not have Proposition A, ATD on the ballot. So
Absolutely, Jeff.
I thank the board for that.
Yeah, no, we're happy to do it. And I want to comment because that's such a great question that was asked on how we communicate with those folks who do not have internet. And we know that the digital divide is very significant in this city. And we have to remember that we're not here just because of this proposition. We've been reaching out. We do go out to transit stations year after year. And I know just in my first year of being on the board, I was at least out at transit stations 4 different times, maybe more. And that was directly related to some VIA projects. But then in addition to that, I was also out for other reasons, for education classes and to talk to people in the community. Just to get on the bus, I always have at least a couple of brochures, and I share those with the elderly. But then VIA's also communicating with the senior centers. I know that the marketing staff always is posting through their newsletters, in their classes, they're giving presentations year round. I mean, you name it. It's either seniors, young professionals, the general population through other businesses. And then they use chambers like they would with us to do the same thing. The West Chamber has done that and been very supportive to do that and share whenever you want access to someone, whenever you want to ask questions, we're able to provide that. So that's a big deal to make sure that that's done. The other thing, Jeff, that, you know, and I'm sure it's related to operation dollars is there's a couple of things. You provided internet around the city when we first started in this pandemic to school age children. And so you may want to, you know, talk about that a little bit. And then also with when there is a very hot days and during, was it fires, assisting
cool
the fire
down
department.
buses, right? Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I really think that people need to get this holistic perspective of that VIA is truly involved in so many things.
So when the pandemic started and schools had to go to remote learning, and obviously there wasn't a lot of time to plan that, right? And they did find that they had students that didn't have internet access, and that was going to make it extremely hard. Well, our ViaTrans service, the ridership on ViaTrans did diminish because many of the workshops and the work locations, et cetera, had closed. And so there was no need for that travel. All of our vehicles are Wi-Fi equipped, all the buses and ViaTrans vans. So what we did in cooperation with school districts and with Saha is we would place on a scheduled basis, we would place a series of vans in those communities, and people could essentially tie on to the service there as a stopgap measure, if you will, to help bridge the digital divide. At the same time we're doing that, another use that we put vans to was to help the food bank. And so we all know where the famous picture, right, of a gazillion cars lined up. And when I see that picture, the first thing I think is these people are financially supporting having that vehicle, right? Whether they have a car payment, they certainly probably have insurance payment. I'm sure they have maintenance payments, fuel payments, all that. They're able to do that, but now they're not able to have food. So that's the one side of that equation. The second side, which is a shame, the second side of the equation is, but what about the people that don't have cars? You know, how do they get food bank food? And so we partnered with the food bank, and we continue to partner actually, even to this day, with the food bank in delivering food to people that don't have access, whether that's helping man a site where people come to that site, or whether that's directly to a senior center where we'll bring in food for a number of people. And then Kristi is absolutely right. We help the fire department. If there's a fire, we'll have cool down buses. During a heat wave, we're distributing water among people. We get them to the libraries and the cooling centers. When people evacuated recently for hurricane and came into San Antonio, we worked with the emergency management people. We helped take them from an intake location to the hotel or where they were going to stay. So we're always out in the community, serving the community in ways above and beyond the very important, essential way we serve the community.
Yeah. And William, sorry, I don't mean to hog up this time, but none of this can be done obviously without the staff of VIA. They are a tremendous, big-hearted people that go to work every single day. The bus operators, the maintenance staff, the administrative staff. I mean, they do a tremendous job. And anytime you talk to them, you can tell that, I mean, this job is not easy, but they take everything with a grain of salt, and they just love what they do. And VIA also, being Military City USA, I mean, we also employ many veterans who have retired, who have sometimes retired twice. And now this is what they want to do because they're able to do it. It's good, it's positive, and they can continue to contribute to our community. And I mean, I'm telling you, those bus operators and maintenance staff, they have a hard job, but they love what they do. And that's why we want to serve, is to provide a better future for them also.
Yeah, actually, I totally agree with that sentiment. There's so much enthusiasm within all levels of VIA, from the marketing staff that gets me the pamphlets and also does their thing, getting out in the community. I mean, this, as you put it, this wasn't just for this proposition. VIA created the VTCC, the VIA Transit Community Council. We have a question that I'll just throw out there for discussion. How do you engage young professionals and/or college students to bring awareness about the Keep SA Moving plan? For me, I learned about it when I watched the ASASW panel earlier this month. So it's good. These panels are getting the information out there. Like I said, the marketing staff, like you said, has been doing a great job. And just at all levels, making the experience with VIA pleasant is something that I've noticed that everyone takes passion at, whether it be from the security individuals at transit centers to the operators, again, to the administrative staff. It really seems to be something that is a passion for so many, that I think it's been a joy to engage with these folks. A lot of them, even the operators, were impressed with Mr. Arndt being out there with me one day at the transit center, and then Representative Lopez and Ms. Villanueva, you both have a tie with Donovan came out, who is Representative Lopez's chief of staff. That was actually his request to join me. I added a location that week, and so there's a lot of enthusiasm about VIA. We need to just help spread the word, I think, and these panels are doing a great job. So we do have about 5 minutes until the end of the session. I just want to kick that out there.
So, William, I would like to say something just and give kind of a little bit of an intro and prompts to Representative Lopez. Our audience should also know that it doesn't just end here. I mean, it's not just about winning this campaign and getting that, that vote for the Proposition A, because even before this, Representative Lopez, Representative Ina Minjares, Representative Allison, and many others were helping us, really craft and move policy forward. So Representative Lopez, before we go, should really make a comment on that, because he did some tremendous work with the VIA staff and the VIA board at the Texas Capitol. And then we're going to go back and do it again. And we're going to work hard to get some additional dollars to match what the voters are bringing to the table when they vote yes for transportation.
Well, I'll be glad to comment. I'll try to keep it to 30 seconds or so because I know we're short on time. But you're right. I've got Bexar County has a really good team in their delegation, their legislative delegation, and we've worked really, really hard to make sure that A, everybody understands what's at risk, and B, that we communicate that outside of our region, because that's what it takes. It really does take, a large group of folks understanding what the issues are. We worked hard last session, and we commit to doing it again this coming session. But it's incumbent upon Jeff, you and your board, to kind of define what those issues are relative to transit, not just San Antonio's transit or Bexar County's transit, but transit across the state, how we can make sure that we implement changes that are beneficial across the board. And oftentimes what that means is really embracing local control, giving local municipalities the ability to control their own destiny as it relates to transportation. So we certainly look to you and your leadership to provide us that understanding. Thanks, Kristi.
Well, just to, I guess we have a few more minutes. We did have that question that just to kick that back out there. How do you engage with young professionals and college students to bring awareness about the Keep SA Moving Plan? Well, I mentioned the VTCC, the Via Transit Community Council. That is a group of individuals that Via has put together that are at all different levels of the community, including a former bus operator. And that's actually how we came to get these panels going. The person mentions that they learned about the Keep SA Moving Plan from a panel earlier this month. Want to definitely give a shout out to Dax Moreno, who's leading the Keep SA Moving, who's leading the SA Startup Week, or I guess it's SA Startup Month, it seems, and all the panelists, as well as the volunteers for the SA Startup Week that make it happen. We really appreciate the opportunity to get the message out multiple times about Via's Keep SA Moving Plan, and it's been very insightful. We've had some great discussions with other Via trustees and panelists, and just wanted to thank each one of you all again. I haven't seen you all in person in a while. Well, Jeff, actually, I saw last week, but Kristi and Ray, hope to see you soon. And thank you so much for your efforts and for continuing to encourage folks to consider voting yes for Proposition ATD. So with that, does anyone have any final thoughts?
I just want to thank you, William. And Dax is also the chair of the VTCC.
He is.
So yeah, you guys are going gangbusters, and we so appreciate that.
And just, one last thought on that, to what Kristi's point earlier, Via did not get moving just for this proposition. The VTCC was formed late last year. It just so happened that Via was on the ball and had this group that could engage, and they empowered us to get out in the community. And so thank you all for the opportunity to do what we do and for being here today. So with that, thank you all very much and have a great day.
Thank you.